Okay. We now will open the floor for you to ask your pressing questions to Mr. Mkhaliphi about his presentation on the national minimum wage. We then are due to go for tea at 11:05, okay? And then come back at 11:25. So to try and ensure that your questions are answered in the manner that you want them to answer, would it be fine if we take them via rounds, and perhaps if we allow you to ask 4 questions per round, keeping in mind that we have up until 11 o'clock, then we have to adjourn for tea, okay? So just by a show of hands, who would like to pose a question to Mr. Mkhaliphi? I see a hand over there. I've got another hand over there.
Noted.
This one.
She's got the mic. She'll take the mic there. Let's just start with the gentleman here. Over there, the gentleman there.
You need a book? Let's bring your book.
Thank you very much. My question is very simple. May the employer reduce hours to 4 hours and still charge 20 rand? Meaning that she may say 20 rand per hour for 4 hours worked.
Okay. You can also write.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Comrade Mkhaliphi. I must first say it was a good presentation. Just one question for me. My name is Zingi Swalosi from COSATU. On the withdrawal of an exemption, my interest is on the employer's financial position, if it has changed. What is the frequency of the employer submitting the status of its financials in order for the Commission to make a determination that it has changed now from where it was when it applied to where it is now, in order for you to be able to withdraw on those bases? Thanks.
Okay, before, he's still just writing it down. Covered? Okay, go for it.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the presentation, comrades, former comrades. I don't know if still known as comrades. To anybody who knows my name, I'm from PSA. I just want to ask regarding the exemption. If I take my car for the washing, for me then to get exemption, what is the procedure in that case as for the individuals? Thank you.
So, there's 2 more. Okay, I know we agreed to 4 questions, but my colleague there is pleading for an additional 1. So
thank you very much. My question is, as much as you talk of the system that will be used for exemption, I just want to know how will you ensure that either the trade union or workers, where they are not organized, they were consulted prior to the exemption application being submitted online? Thank you.
Okay. We'll take the last one now for this particular round, and then we'll allow Mr. Mkhaliphi to answer, and then we'll see we still have enough time to go for the next round. Thank you, ma'am.
I'm from the Casual Workers Advice Office. One of the things that you mentioned is that out of the 3,000 referrals to the CCMA, only 9 were made by the Department of Labor, and I want to offer a possible explanation for that. We've been sending workers to the Department of Labor to report non-compliances as low as 8 Rand an hour. And we've had instances where the Department of Labor officials have sent the workers back to work, told the workers to ask their employer to raise their wages and come back after a month if that hadn't happened. And many workers have obviously since been dismissed for that. I mean, I'd probably like to know who we report the Department of Labor to in addition to the employers.
Okay. Yeah. You're on your own, Mr. Mkhalip.
The issue about whether employers can reduce hours to comply to pay 20 rand. Now, if you were working, let's say 45 hours, then the company says now you will work 30 hours so that your take-home pay is still the same, basically. Whether can they do that? Remember, when you change working condition, there's a process. There's nothing in the law prevent an employer doing anything. The principle of no work, no pay is not affected by the minimum wage. Now, if an employer wants to change your conditions, then they've got to follow the LRA. The LRA determines that. If they consult in terms of section 1189, they consult, they do all the issues, and if you feel aggrieved about that change of condition, you must come here at the CCMA for the CCMA to conciliate that. Therefore, nothing in the law prevents employers changing conditions by complying with the law. The only thing the law says, if you come to work, you are guaranteed a 4 hours pay. Now, if there's a breakdown, there's load shedding. Work here, there's load shedding, you can't work. You've worked for 1 hour, you are guaranteed 4 hours in terms of the law. That's what it is. And then the employer will say, you can't work, go home, but they must pay you 4 hours if you were there for less than 4 hours. But it does not affect the processes of changing the condition of employment. The LRA still applies. If you want to apply for an exemption for somebody to wash your car, it's the same thing as a sole trader. You're a sole trader. You are supplied the same information that the sole trader must apply. But why would you want, if you cannot afford, want someone to wash your car? Then wash your car yourself if you can't afford. But technically, you can apply as a sole trader and supply the information. It might cost you more and more time to do this than just pay the 80 rand. How are we going to ensure that consultation takes place? Remember, we had to balance two things. When we were debating this at Netleg, we said to business, because business said, you are not going to be able to handle the numbers that are going to come. And our response was, we need to develop a system, because we accept that if a company is in distress, it cannot afford a minimum wage. And we take 6 months in deciding whether they've got an exemption or not. By the time they receive that certificate, the company is closed. And those workers have lost their jobs. Now, that was the mischief that we wanted to deal with in developing a system. Now, in a system, just like in the tax system, if you say to the tax a person that you travel, when you write your RP5, I know this is what you do. You've traveled 30,000 kilometers for this year. Even if you have not traveled it, that's what you say. The taxman take it with good faith. This is what we say. The taxman can do two things. The taxman can say, if we do the same, submit all of us. They can, some of us pay, some of us take on audit and say, give us your logbook, give us this information. But the principle is that SARS moved from the basis of trust, that we trust that you are not going to lie. You are going to give us the correct information. It's the same principle here. We say, we trust that when the system asks you, have you consulted? And you say, yes, I've consulted, that you have consulted. But the system is built on the same basis that after a number of applications, you might be taken for audit. And in that audit, they will say to you, how did you consult? Who did you consult? Can we speak to the people that you've consulted? And if it comes out that you did not consult, the certificate is withdrawn. Or workers will come forward and say we were not consulted when they see the reduction. But if we are going to say, before we give you a certificate, we must make sure that you've consulted, then it will defeat the principle that we've agreed on at NETLEC that says decisions on exemption will be done with speed. That's the issue. Therefore, you've got to make sure that you make those decisions, but at the same time, you must be able to check. And I come back on the issue of the risk. If employers believe that by lying, when they say they've consulted, they are not going to be caught, they will say that. But if we catch one or two of them, and we increase the risk of lying, it's not going to happen. And that's, for me, the trick in this. We've got to be vigilant and take some of them on audit, and those that we catch on audit that they have not consulted, withdraw the certificate, because that's what the law says, and publicize that, just like we did with this company that changed the certificate, so that anybody who does that must be prepared to take the risk of that. But you cannot have a situation that you say you can only get it if we are satisfied that you've consulted. And that's the balancing act that we had to do. And in doing that balancing act, there might be employers who do not give us a true story. But for us, what I'm trying to push is that there must be a risk in doing that. If there's no risk, if they are not caught, not a single one is caught in doing that, then they'll continue doing it. And we've got from our side to make sure that we do our work and take them on audit.
Okay, ladies and gents, we will now open the floor for the second round of questions. But before we get to that, Refilwe, I'll take this one for the team. Being a man, we're used to apologizing. I just want to apologize for failing to acknowledge the president of COSATU, Mrs. Zingiswa Loss. We humbly apologize. We acknowledge you, ma'am. Thank you. And with that being said, we can now have round two, same setup, 4 questions for Mr. Mkhaliphi.
Thank you. My question would be, the system seems to be more reactive than proactive. Therefore, if it be found that the applicant was not truthful and the certificate is revoked, is the certificate then revoked in retrospect or from the date of revocation or rather withdrawal? Thank you.
Okay. We've got a hand at the back there, and we've got a hand over there. Got the last one there. Mr. Mkhaliphi, can you squeeze in one more?
Casual Workers Advice Office, it's very noticeable that you did not answer our question about what happens as cases, as we have had, where the Department of Labour sends workers away when they come to report non-compliance and in the meantime get dismissed. This follows what we have always said, that the Department of Labour is trying to make national minimum wage compliance the CCMA's problem. It is the Department of Labour's role to be taking this up seriously, and if they are turning workers away, who do we report the Department of Labour to?
Did you get that? Okay. Got it. Can we give him a mic?
Thank you, Mr. Ngongo. My question will be, it's a shorter one. I need to understand that since we are dealing with the National Minimum Wage Act, if I have to be approached, maybe as an inspector, approached by an employee from who's a domestic worker, what the answer will be, because it seems like as much as we have this National Minimum Wage Act, but they still have to earn below that, because surely they will need explanation in that regard, and the farm workers as well.
The gentleman with the cap over there, and then this side. While they're sorting themselves out there, just want to allow the president. She also indicated that you did not answer her question. Do you maybe want to pose that question again, ma'am?
Thank you, Ngongo. You didn't. Yeah, it was not answered. My question was not about consultation. I understand the process of consultation. My question was around the withdrawal of the exemption when the employer now is able to pay the national minimum wage. Now, when the financial status of the organization has changed, my question was, how would you know that the financial status now has changed and therefore you may withdraw the exemption that was initially given? Is there an interval of the employer having to, whether it's 6 months after the exemption, that they must submit their financial status in order for you to make that determination? That was the question. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to know how long should you allow a worker to launch that dispute? As we are having an indication, some other unfair dismissal is 30 days, unfair labor practice is 90 days. How long can allow a worker to launch that dispute of a national minimum wage?
Morning. Mine is on the number of inspectors. I mean, currently the department has insufficient number of inspectors, even if you talk of compliance or enforcement. But for as long as you have this, less than 500 inspectors nationwide, it's not going to be, possible to enforce the compliance with this minimum wage. Thanks.
Thank you.
If an employer does not comply with the conditions of the certificate and the certificate is withdrawn, the question is, from what date is that withdrawal? Is it from the date it was issued? Is it from the date it was withdrawn? Now, the law does not talk to this. The regulations do not talk to this. But the courts will have to determine this. If you receive a benefit fraudulently, law tells you that if that is found out that you should not have received that benefit, then the withdrawal should be from the date of the certificate. Now, remember I said the law does not specifically deal with this, the national minimum wage, and the regulation don't talk to that. But legal principle tells me that if you've got a benefit that you should not have got in the first place, and it is found that you should not have got it, it is fair that the benefit is withdrawn from the date that we got it. But these are the issues that will be determined by the court. Now, if you're asking me, how are we gonna make that interpretation? If it's made by me, I'll withdraw it from the date that we've got it. And then let whoever complains goes to court and challenge that. So that then the court can give us clarity. And it's not wrong to take brave decisions and give the court an opportunity to clarify if there's no clarity in terms of the law. Where do we report the Department of Labor? I apologize for not, it's not that I ignored it. Well, the Department of Labor, if you know who's in charge of the province, for me that's the first port of call. If you're in Gauteng, you know that Tsepo is in charge of the Gauteng province, is the first person to go to, if you know that person. If you don't know that person, then you report to the DG. The DG is responsible for the department. If the department does not do its job, you report to the DG. If the DG does not do his job, you report the DG to the minister. If the minister is not doing her job, then you've got to go to the president. If the president does not do the job, then you can, on the 8th of May, decide how to deal with that. And that's the best answer that I can give. I mean, if an inspector does not do their job, then you should be able to go to the head of that office. Just like if the Pick and Pay, they are not serving me to my satisfaction, I ask, who's the manager here? I want to speak to the manager. The same applies here. If I go to the labor center is not giving proper service, the first question that you must ask, I want to speak to the person who's in charge. And see whether can you deal with that at that level. If not, you go to the person who's in charge. And if you go to our website, there are many names there of people that you could also contact. I've been contacted many a times and solved many people's problems in terms of these issues. But that's how I can put the answer. There's no one person, but if you want one person, it's the DG and the minister. How do we explain the rationale for 15 Rand for domestic workers, for 11 Rand for 18 Rand for farm workers? Well, at the negotiations at NEDLEC, the fear was job losses, nothing else. And the decision in terms of NEDLEC is that the commission must do a research, because the wages for domestic workers must be equal to the national minimum wage in 2 years. If research indicates that at the level that they are in now, there's been no job losses. Now, we must remember this. Job losses, if you are not employed, there's nobody who's living in poverty than a person who's not employed. Now, if research tells us that if you introduce a national minimum wage in those sectors at the level of 20 Rand, it might cause huge unemployment. We can't ignore that. Therefore, the issue was debated at NEDLEC. discuss, and a compromise was reached on the level that were on the table. It's going to be difficult to explain it as an inspector, but that's the basis of the decision. And whether workers are going to be happy, that's something else. The question on financial information, if your financial situation changes, how do we know? That's basically the question from COSATU, is that do employers have to report 6 months down the line? Do they have to submit information? The answer is no. There's no requirement in the law. Remember, in the law it says we can only give exemption for 12 months. In the law, then the law says that if the status of the company has changed, then the certificate can be withdrawn. And remember that in all our legislation are based on the premise that we've got business, we've got labor as stakeholders. It's all our responsibility to ensure that inspectors get the necessary information. Now, if your competitor as business apply for exemption and they get exemption, and then you know that the situation has changed 6 months down the line, it's your responsibility to also help us and say, we think this competitor now does not deserve the exemption that they got 6 months ago because the situation has changed. The same applies with workers. We expect workers to be able to assist us if the situation has changed. In short, there's no requirement in terms of the regulation and the law for the employer who has received a certificate to submit additional financial information at a later stage. But if we receive that information either through newspapers, through labor, through business, the law gives us the power to be able to review that certificate. That's how it is. But there's no requirement for employer to give further information. The issue of the time frames. Remember, in terms of the BCA before the amendment had a time frame of 12 months that an inspector could not issue a compliance order for 12 months after 12 months. That has been amended to 3 years now. Therefore, an inspector can take up a case if, in terms of the BCA, if the case has happened 3 years ago. And that's the only time frame in the BCA. The other issue that you're asking for is on the issue of unfair labor practice. What are the time frames? I mean, in terms of the law, I mean, those are regulated as any other case in the CCMA. In terms of those times, there are no special time frames in terms of that. And if you not pay the minimum wage, then the 3 years comes into the picture. Now, on the issue of the numbers of inspectors, first, we've got more than 500 inspectors. The first thing that we need to clarify. We've got more than 1,000 inspectors. We've got around just less than 1,500. That's the first thing. The second thing is, what is enough in numbers? What is enough? The police says the same thing. We don't have enough police. Can we ever have enough inspectors to put an inspector in each and every factory? The answer is no. We'll never be able to do that. Can the fiscus, from where we are, remember we've just increased VAT because the fiscus is struggling. If fiscus afford an extra allocation to the department to appoint inspectors? The answer is no. We must make work smarter, use the resources that we have better. That is why we're introducing the system where workers must give us the information. We believe that system will allow us to use our resource better and smarter. If you look on the ILO standard, the ILO have got standard in terms of number of inspectors. Just like the police, there's an international standard. The ILO says 17 inspectors for every 100,000. If you look purely on that, then we've got more than enough inspectors in terms of the numbers. The other problem that we have with inspectors that we need to look at from where I'm sitting is that if you look on economically active population, you look in the Northwest, not Northwest, Northern Cape, you apply the ILO standard. We've got more inspectors in the Northern Cape than Gauteng, if you look on the numbers. Therefore, the allocation of our inspectors is not based on the number of people within that area. They are more based on the size of the province. But that's not what the ILO says. The ILO says you've got to look on the number of the economically active population in that sector, the number of workers in your area, and then allocate inspectors accordingly. And that's a challenge that we need to do, to look at. And I'm challenging our colleagues. I'm saying this excuse about enough inspectors, it gives us excuse. We can always come to you and say the reason we did not do inspectors, the reason we've sent workers back and said come back a month later is because we don't have enough. It's a nice excuse to have. And I'm saying we should go beyond that. We should use the resource. We are not going to have more inspectors. There's no money in the country. If there was money, we wouldn't be increasing VAT and all the things that we've done in the last budget. Therefore, there's no money for more inspectors. We've got to use the resources that we have smarter. That is why we're introducing the national minimum wage in Pimba line, so that we can have the intelligence and inspectors concentrate in those companies that are not paying the minimum wage. And we say, if they are not paying the national minimum wage, they are more likely not to comply with overtime, with all other benefits in the PCA. And in that way, we'll be able to use our resource smartly. That's what all companies say. They say we must work smart and use the resources. We don't have endless resources in government. Therefore, we are not going to have additions at all. Thank you very much.
Before you go. Okay, before Mr. Mkalipi goes, it's my duty to protect you now. We won't be taking any more questions in as far as disciplinary is concerned. However, we would like you to be interviewed, so it's not over. Shalini over there is gonna show you where we will be interviewing you for purposes of disciplinary. But I'd like to say thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, we're a little bit ahead of time. It's about 5 minutes. Can we break now for tea? Tea was due to start at 11:05 for us to come back at 11:25. Can we break now and come back at 11:20? I think you're going to need this refreshment for our next speaker. You need to be ready for him. He's coming. Thank you.
Thank you.